There were a total of 10 Nazi Party rallies, 8 of which were held in Nuremberg. When Hitler came to power in 1933, he designated Nuremberg as the city of the Nazi Party rallies. From that point on, the party rallies were given a motto. 1933 Victory Party Congress. 1934 Party Congress of Unity and Strength. 1935 Freedom Party Congress. 1936 Party Congress of Honor. 1937 Labour Party Congress. 1938 Greater Germany Party Congress. 1939 The Reich Party Congress of Peace was already planned but did not take place because of the German Wehrmacht's attack on Poland and the outbreak of the Second World War. When I walked around this area, I always asked myself what stories were hidden behind these stones and doors. So I set out to research these stories, and that is how this documentation came about. The first party congress of the NSDAP took place in Munich in January 1923. The second party congress took place in Weimar in 1926. In 1927 and 1929, Nuremberg was chosen as the party congress venue. The party conferences served as a way for the Nazis to present themselves. Up to 1 million visitors came to the annual propaganda events held in September.
Ich bin Babette von Roggi.
I'm Babette from Roggi and a real Nuremberg child. I was born here in the early 1950s, when people still played with tin toys and photos still had white jagged edges. My parents always took me for walks around this area. I can't remember, but they often told me about it. Only one general plan has survived from the Nazi era. The map shows an overview in the final planning stage. I will explain to you what happened at each location and site, what buildings were actually built, what remains of the Nazi Party rally grounds, and how it is used today. In the last part, I already introduced you to the Luitpold Arena, today's Luitpoldhain. This part now deals with the Luitpold Hall. today's Luitpoldhain Leisure Park. Today, only the entrance steps remain of the former Luitpoldhalle. In addition to the steps, a granite path along which the SA and SS marched into the arena is still partially intact. At the end of the stone steps once stood the Luitpoldhalle, or popularly known as the Old Congress Hall. The MAN once built the machine hall to present its large machines. It was built in 1906. From 1912, the glazed three-aisled steel-framed hall served as the main restaurant for the newly opened zoo, which had its home right next door and was also used as a festival and event hall. Before Hitler came to power, the Nazis used the hall as accommodation during the Reich Party rallies in 1927 and 29. Today, there is only a car park at the site. Since the playful Art Nouveau facade of the hall, built in 1906, did not match the look of the Nazis' Luitpold arena, Albert Speer clad the entrance and the back of the hall with shell limestone in the Nazi monumental style in 1935, so that the Luitpold Hall would match the rest of the Luitpold arena. Speer completely eliminated the character of the former building. The building was 180 meters long and 49 meters wide. The hall had space for 16,000 people sitting or 30,000 people standing. Since the foundation stone of the new Congress Hall was not laid until 1935, it served as an assembly hall for the Nazi regime until 1938. The interior of the hall was also changed. Flags and curtains drew the attention of visitors away from the architecture and towards the pulpit. This was where the speeches were given.
Deutsches Volk hilft dir selbst. Jeder soll helfen. Die ist uns verschrieben und verfallen mit neuem Befehl.
Wir gedenken der Toten unserer Bewegung. Der Toten, die starben im Kampf um die Freiheit.
Was Jahrhunderten trotz
für uns, unser Oberster, wird die Einführung der allgemeinen immer wieder herniedersteigen. Und dass man die Wahrheit über Deutschland, 50.000 Mann auf den Baustellen, ganz Deutschland erfasste, überall herrscht seit einem Jahr für den deutschen die Reinheit seiner Rasse hält. Deshalb innerlich nicht zu uns gehört.
ist Hitler. Hitler aber ist Deutschland, wie Deutschland Hitler ist.
The Horst Wessel song, Raise the Flag, was also sung here. But who was Horst Wessel actually? Horst Ludwig Georg Erich Wessel was a storm leader in Berlin in the SA, the paramilitary combat organization of the NSDAP. Wessel was the author of the Horst Wessel song, which became the party anthem of the NSDAP shortly after his death. From 1933 to 1945, it formed the second part of the German national anthem following the Deutschlandlied. In 1929, Horst Wessel first published his poem The Flag High, the Ranks Tight in the magazine Der Angriff. The poem was later set to the melody of a sailor's song. After Wessel was shot in his apartment by KPD members, Nazi propaganda portrayed him as a martyr of the movement. Goebbels' Ministry for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda made Wessel's murder into a hero and a martyr of the movement. He was buried in the St. Marien, St. Nikolai Cemetery in Berlin. Horst Wessel was buried in his father's grave. The cemetery is surrounded by busy roads, but there is still peace inside. Soldiers of the Red Army completely demolished the Wessel's grave in 1945. Today there is nothing to remind us of it. The grave was a long time the target of collective hero worship. Visiting his grave on the day of his death and singing the Horst Wessel song became sacred events. Streets, squares, schools and hospitals were named after Horst Wessel in the Nazi state. Everyone who was of rank and name in the party attended the funeral. Horst Wessel was the supposed role model for young people.
Vor einem Sturm marschiert ein junger deutscher Arbeiter. Aufrecht, stolz, der Kamerad seiner Kameraden und der Führer seiner Gefolgschaft. Wie all die anderen.
Joseph Goebbels was a great supporter of Wessel. The KPD denied any responsibility for Wessel's killing and claimed that it was a private dispute between the landlady and the former prostitute with whom Wessel lived in her apartment. The party also spread the rumor that Horst Wessel had been caught in the crossfire between two gangs of pimps and had been hit. Wessel did not die immediately. He underwent emergency surgery in the hospital, which initially saved his life, but he then died there of blood poisoning. The hospital was then named after him. The flag is high, the ranks are closed, was heard in all towns and at events in the Third Reich. The song can no longer be sung today and is therefore banned under paragraph 86a of the Penal Code. Back to the Luitpoldhalle. With the Nuremberg Laws, also known as the Nuremberg Race Laws or Aryan Laws, the National Socialists put their anti-Semitic and racist ideology on a legal basis.
Eheschließungen zwischen Juden und Staatsangehörigen deutschen oder artverwandten Blutes sind verboten.
The laws were announced at the Seventh Reich Party Congress of the NSDAP, the so-called Reich Party Congress of Freedom. Marriages and extramarital relations between Jews and citizens of German or related blood were now prohibited and punishable by prison and penitentiary sentences. The Nuremberg Race Laws were a decisive step towards the legal basis for the Holocaust. Hitler wanted to have one of the largest organs in Europe installed in the Luitpoldhalle, an Opus Voce organ that was intended for the Martin Luther Memorial Church in Berlin was installed in Nuremberg for a party conference. After the party conference, it then began its original journey to Berlin. Today, this organ is installed in the Martin Luther Memorial Church and has lost none of its enchanting sound from back then. The church was built during the Nazi era between 1933 and 35. It is one of the few Nazi churches that survived the World War. As soon as you enter the vestibule, you can see the influence of the Nazis. A ceiling chandelier in the shape of an iron cross lights up the room. The brown color of the entire interior is not based on the brown era of the National Socialists, but the architect simply wanted to incorporate the warm brown sand tones. Today, the suffering Christ is usually seen on the cross. Here in the Martin Luther Church, Christ is depicted on the cross in the victorious pose, looking upwards. The wooden frame of the pulpit shows figures carved from wood. In the middle is Jesus giving the Sermon on the Mount. Next to him stands a soldier. The soldier is depicted in a field uniform and steel helmet. Horst Wessel is also immortalized as a figure holding the hand of a Hitler youth child. On the baptismal font are brown wood carvings, a mother with child right next to Jesus, and a German man in a soldier's coat. During the Second World War, the church was damaged, and the organ console was badly damaged by rainwater penetrating it. The entire instrument is said to have been standing outside for over a year and a half. Today, however, the damage can no longer be seen or heard. The first organ in the Luitpoldhalle can still be enjoyed today at church services in Berlin. The largest and most modern organ, a Walker and Sauer organ, Opus Diabolo with 16,000 pipes, was then ordered and delivered to Nuremberg. It was installed at the front, hidden behind a large swastika curtain. The first sounds from the organ pipes were the hymn, "We Step Forward to Pray." The song is also part of the German Army's Grand Tattoo. For a while, a bowling alley was set up in the Luitpoldhalle between party conferences. Hitler was a great fan of bowling. In August 1942, the Luitpold Hall was hit by bombs and burned down completely, including the Walker organ. The ruins were demolished after the war. In 1959, work began on restoring and redesigning the Luitpold Grove as a recreational facility and park, with almost all of the buildings from the Nazi era being demolished. Only remains of the semicircle of the terraces of the grandstands have been preserved and can still be seen today. Stone remains of the Luitpoldhalle, which was faced with granite by Albert Speer, can also be found on the site. In the following parts of the film, I explore further building evidence. Many people supported me in my project and opened their doors for me. They gave me insights into the buildings and told me their own stories that they associate with the Nazi Party rally grounds.
Sieht, wie es renoviert worden ist. Jawohl, das müssen wir alle so Seiten kurz mal rein. Ja, der Suizid von Robert Ley.
Es war halt so, da kamen Leute und wollten den Raum sehen.
Und das ist das Besondere an der Kinderweihnacht.
Genau, der Tierpark und der Zoo.
Meinen Job gibt es ja seit 1495, den war ja auch
hier. Linie, das Orchester im Metropolklubb, wir spielen in Nürnberg-Konzerte. Scheiße, also wahrscheinlich nicht so passt. Ganz froh, dass wir die Räumlichkeiten hier haben.
The history of the American occupiers after the war and the motorcycle stronghold of Nuremberg. These are other topics that I will tell you about, as well as the Norrisring street circuit around the stone grandstand. After the motorcycle era came the era of high horsepower cars. Today, the Porsche Cup and the DTM race here. The Nuremberg Zoo also has a connection to the Nazi Party rally grounds. Nuremberg's underworld, a city of its own beneath the city. From the historic beer cellars to the most famous art bunker to the ABC shelters during the Cold War. I find traces of this down here too. I visit the concentration camps that are directly connected to the Nazi Party rally grounds at home and abroad. Of course, the Dutzendeich is also part of history, and I am allowed to accompany people who look after the body of water, protect it and pull the plug once a year. My journey takes me to Italy, specifically to Rome. This is where the Colosseum is located. The Colosseum is the largest constructed amphitheater in the world. It was built for the amusement and entertainment of the people of Rome. Inside the Colosseum, there were water fights with ships, gladiator fights, executions of condemned prisoners, and even animal fights. The animals that were shown were very different: lions, rhinos, elephants, ostriches, and tigers. 2 floors of chambers, dungeons, and cages were built under the arena floor, a kind of backstage area. From there, the animals and the fighters could be effectively shown using the elevators through the 60 trapdoors in the floor. 50 meters high, 188 meters long, these are the dimensions of the elliptical arena. The size of the Colosseum is still impressive today, although it is now just a large ruin. The Colosseum is, so to speak, the mother of all stadiums. The first big giant on the Nazi Party rally grounds was the Congress Hall. The Colosseum would have fit 1.5 times into the Congress Hall, also known as the Führer's Cathedral. Hitler believed he had identified a kind of inferiority complex in the German people, so the sight of such enormous buildings was supposed to boost their self-esteem. When you see them for the first time, you think it's a film set from Rome. The Congress Hall was supposed to replace the Luitpold Hall in the Luitpoldhain. Granite was the building material on the outside. Bricks and reinforced concrete were used on the inside. The foundation stone was laid in September 1935 during the Party Congress. Adolf Hitler laid the foundation stone for the building on September 11, 1935, during the Reich Party Rally of Freedom. Hitler spoke at the ceremony with the following words: "A hall shall be built which is intended to gather the elite of the National Socialist Reich within its walls every year for thousands of years. But if the movement should ever fall silent, then thousands of years from now this witness will still speak here." After the foundation stone was laid, construction work on the propaganda building began. The Congress Hall was to be completed in time for the Party Congress in 1943. The plans were drawn up in 1933. The model was to be the Colosseum in Rome, and Hitler visited the Colosseum several times. The area around the Dutzenteich was swampy, so an elaborate foundation had to be built first. For the foundation, 22,000 concrete piles were driven into the ground about 16 meters deep. Then a meter-thick concrete slab was poured, and the building was erected on top of it. The exact plans and files for the Congress Hall were lost after the war. Therefore, all views of the finished Congress Hall are based only on hearsay from the architects involved. Due to the enormous building masses, it was important to design construction site logistics. There was no need for transport routes, and the workers were also housed in accommodation on the site. They even installed tracks and a siding for a railway, with space for 200 wagons on the site. In addition, 2 concrete factories, 2 mortar factories, a cement factory, and brick and round iron warehouses were built. 20 cranes were working simultaneously on the construction of the Congress Hall. In the cloister vault, granite stones and the columns weighing several tons were brought into place using trolleys. The first thing that was done, however, was a scaled-down wooden model of the facade to test the impression the facade would make and to impress Hitler during his visits to Nuremberg. A second wooden model showed the interior with the intended overall height. Hitler himself once described the building as a colossus. The Congress Hall was to be 275 meters by 265 meters. The inner courtyard measures 180 by 160 meters. Hitler visited the construction site again and again and observed the progress. The 40-meter-high facade, which can still be seen today, was completed in 1939. With the roof, the building was to reach a height of 70 meters. In 1943, construction came to a complete standstill. Around 50,000 people could be seated inside. The audience stands were arranged in a semicircle and faced the speaker, who stood in the middle on a kind of altar and spoke to the NSDAP members. The stage behind Adolf Hitler's lectern had a capacity of 3,000 people with their standards. The cantilevered skylight roof was a challenge and was never completed. It was supposed to be made of glass and support the glass roof over 160 meters without supports. To this day, it is disputed whether Hitler's engineers would have managed it. The granite for the outer facade of the Congress Hall, which is up to 5 meters thick in places, was not mined from the concentration camps. Around 80 quarries delivered the granite quarter stones to Nuremberg. The spectator stands were never completed either. To this day, only the shell of the huge staircase remains. In an emergency, the 50,000 people had to be able to leave the building within 15 minutes through the many entrances and stairs. The Congress Hall was to have the largest organ in the world and a shrine where the imperial regalia could be kept. The entire construction was only planned for 1 day a year. The NSDAP was only supposed to move in here on 1 day during the Reich Party rallies, so the whole building was only for 1 day a year. So Hitler was simply interested in the size and in impressing people. It was built and financed by the Reich Party Rallies Association, which was the German Reich, the state of Bavaria, the city of Nuremberg, and the NSDAP. The city did not have that much money at the time, so it provided the labor and the land. In contrast to the Nuremberg city center, the torso was hit very little by bombs during the Second World War. During the war, an anti-aircraft gun was placed on the roof of the hall. The Congress Hall was only hit once on the 3rd floor, and the traces of the hit can still be clearly seen today. The different colors of the bricks show how much damage the bomb hit did to the wall. During the Second World War, 5 very young soldiers were stationed here on the 3rd floor as guards and gunners. They were 17 years old at the time and visited their former anti-aircraft position a few years ago. They were anti-aircraft helpers at the time. The term anti-aircraft helpers was used to describe the young people who were released from school in the last years of the war to carry out their military duties in the war. The young people told us what it was like back then and showed the Congress Hall manager where they slept and where they spent their free time. The young anti-aircraft helpers were very proud of their city and immortalized themselves in paintings on the walls of the Congress Hall. Even today, many years later, their drawings are still quite easy to recognize. They said that one of them was very artistically inclined and that their mission on the roof of the Congress Hall was more of an adventure for them. They fired anti-aircraft guns but didn't shoot down any Allied bombers. After the end of World War II, the Congress Hall served as a storage area for military equipment and food for the American troops. Some German prisoners were also quartered here for a while. The interior of the hall was built with reinforced concrete and bricks. The exterior facade was clad with granite blocks. The granite blocks have different colors and were not arranged randomly. There was a construction plan that stated exactly where which granite was to be used. Each granite has different thermal expansion rates, so it had to be precisely calculated so that the stones would stay in place even under the heat, and the joints would not start to expand due to thermal expansion. The plan for the stones has been preserved. Not all of the granite stones that were delivered could be processed. Opposite, beneath the mound of earth, lies a stone secret. Here are the remains of the granite stones, up to 2 meters thick, already marked with numbers and holes for the construction site's trolleys. At the end of the hill, you can still find individual granite stones. Inside the courtyard, you stand directly on the 3.25 meter thick floor slab. Under the round building, the concrete slab is 11 meters thick. If you look closely, you can still see the remains of the construction workers from back then. In the area of the third floor, there is still a wooden beam from a scaffolding that was not removed at the time. It has been stuck in the walls for over 80 years now. From preserved delivery notes, we even know quite precisely how many stones were used here. $27.2 million hard-fired bricks. $12.4 million bricks for masonry and 2.4 million bricks for hydraulic engineering. Even though from the outside you might think that the horseshoe, the torso of the staircase, has been completed, the third floor was not quite finished. A small corner on the southern head building was not completed. The city filled the corner on the outside with stones. Inside, there is only a wooden construction under the roof. In 1948, the Americans returned the property to the city. Due to a lack of large buildings in Nuremberg that had not been destroyed, the building exhibition took place in the Congress Hall in 1949. At that time, the German granite industry advertised its exhibition stand with the slogan "Granite, the stone for eternity." From then on, people also spoke of the round exhibition building. 500 companies from 8 European countries presented problems and solutions for reconstruction. The first model apartments and houses were advertised here with models. Rubble recycling machines were shown. The machines were very timely because there were still plenty of piles of rubble from the war in Nuremberg. The exhibition was a success. My path now leads me to the roof of the Congress Hall, to the observation deck. From here, directly under the corrugated iron roof, you can see a ledge. At the time, this was the terrace of a cafe during the building exhibition. It was the Königshof Cafe. Guests could move around the horseshoe, sit outside and treat themselves to something. The interior is on the second floor of the Congress Hall. I set out to look for clues. It is easy to find because the plaster casts of the decorations are still there. Here was the kitchen, the trestles, and when it rained, there were also some tables inside available for visitors. This breach in the wall brought guests to the outside area and the walkway. The two door stoppers on the floor are still there. The cafe was only created temporarily for the building exhibition. In July 1950, Nuremberg's 900th anniversary took place. The square in front of the Congress Hall was used for a railway exhibition. Of course, the Adler's first railway was there too. The arcade of the Congress Hall and the ground floor were also included in the celebrations. Numerous wall paintings still bear witness to this today. The place where food and souvenirs from Nuremberg were once sold is now where the city's traffic signs are stored. The two staircases at the end of the arcade were only built for the building exhibition. They were not included in Hitler's plans. Visitors were not expected to have to go all the way back when they reached one end of the circular building. Hitler planned to fill everything up to the ground floor with sand and add an open staircase. This way, the basement would never have been seen. The idea of making the Congress Hall in grosser steel usable was also considered. Since the municipal stadium, today's FCN stadium, was still used by the US Army, a football stadium was missing. There were plans to expand the Congress Hall into a football stadium. However, the conversion failed due to lack of funding. There were further considerations, from complete demolition to converting the building into a shopping and entertainment center with senior citizen apartments, fitness studios, and swimming pools on the roof. Everything failed due to money. Another story is that of the pigeon catcher. The town had a plague of pigeons, so they came up with the idea of putting a bounty on the pigeon. The pigeon man received a bounty from the town for each pigeon he caught. He caught the pigeons and then brought the pigeons from the city center to the convention hall. There he kept them captive until he killed them. There is also a story that the pigeons were forgotten in the Congress Hall, but that is a fantasy. The pigeon coop is still weathering today in an inaccessible section of the Congress Hall. The pigeon man received his money for each head of pigeon delivered. How he actually transported them from life to the afterlife is not known. The entire length of the round building is formed by an arcade with an open cloister and pylons. The first two floors, the first and second floors, each end at a wall. Between the ground floor and the first floor, there is a service corridor that cannot be seen from the outside. The power lines converge in the supply corridor and the electricity meters are housed here. The water and probably also the gas pipes come here. Many of the electricity meters here are part of the history of the Congress Hall because of their age. The supply corridor runs all the way around the entire circular building. Once a year, the administrator has to read the electricity meters of the approximately 100 tenants who have rented space in the Congress Hall. The third floor was not intended for use by people. Here, set back towards the inside, there are 15 basketball-sized halls that were intended for the heating, cooling, and ventilation technology. The interior of the Congress Hall was supposed to have space for 40,000 seats and 10,000 standing places. You can still see the openings in the walls for the ventilation and heating pipes that were supposed to transport fresh air into the interior of the hall. The city walled up the entrances to the spectator stands in the Congress Hall so that separate rooms could be created that could be used. The staircases inside the round building were also covered with boards to create usable storage space. The imperial regalia, also known as imperial insignia or imperial treasure, are the insignia of power of the emperors and kings of the Holy Roman Empire, and the only crown treasure of the Middle Ages that has been largely, completely preserved. The imperial regalia consist of two different groups. The larger group is the so-called Nuremberg regalia. The name comes from the fact that they were kept in Nuremberg from 1424 to 1796. The Roman-German King Sigismund transferred the imperial regalia to the imperial city of Nuremberg with a dated document from 1423 for safekeeping for all eternity, irrevocably and incontestably, and had them brought to the city the following year. From 1349 onwards, the citizens of Nuremberg were allowed to take a look at the imperial regalia. This happened on Nuremberg's main market square. The Frauenkirche, which resembles a reliquary, was expanded especially for this purpose. The balcony on the west side of the church was created specifically to allow citizens to view the crown treasure. They were displayed on the balcony of the Frauenkirche, below the famous little man running, and shown to the people. Today, the Christ Child opens the world-famous Nuremberg Christmas market from this balcony. Because of the threat posed by Napoleon's French troops in the 19th century, the imperial regalia were brought to safety in Vienna via Regensburg. For the National Socialists, the insignia were a symbol of the 1,000-year Reich. On Adolf Hitler's orders, the imperial regalia were brought back from Vienna to Nuremberg in 1938, before the war began.
I ask you, my Führer, to accept from the city of Nuremberg, in accordance with old German custom, a sign of your gratitude, loyalty, and devotion, the German imperial sword to the Führer of all Germans, who has made Germany united, strong, and free again.
Herr Oberbürgermeister.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to thank you and the city of Nuremberg for the warm welcome today. The symbolic sign of German imperial strength that you have given me here as a gift should always remind me of this memorable party conference in the third year of the National Socialist Revolution and the first year of the new German freedom. And I ask you all to call out our German greetings to the old city of the Reich Party conferences. Nuremberg, Heil!
Even before the German troops invaded Austria, telephone threats from Hermann Göring replaced the Austrian state regime in the night of March 11-12, 1938. At dawn on March 12th at 5:30 a.m., 6 divisions of the German Wehrmacht crossed the border into Austria at Passau and Schörding without a shot being fired. One people, one empire, one leader. The Austrians greeted the German soldiers with joy and waved the swastika flags. The soldiers encountered no resistance. There are probably many reasons for the fanatical reception. Since the end of the First World War, large parts of the population in the Republic of Austria had hoped for the unification of the two states, but the victorious Allied powers of the First World War prohibited this. Hitler's initial plan was to unite Austria with Germany in a union, but in view of the people's rejoicing, he decided to annex Austria completely to the Greater German Reich. With the invasion of German soldiers, Austria disappeared politically from the map. After the annexation, Austria was now called Ostmark. In the next 6 weeks after the Anschluss, over 70,000 Jews were arrested. At the insistence of Nuremberg's Nazi mayor Willy Liebel, the imperial regalia were returned to Nuremberg after the annexation of Austria. In a secret operation, they were transported from Vienna to Nuremberg on a special Reichsbahn train at the end of August 1938. Hitler had precise ideas about where the imperial regalia should be displayed. They were to be displayed like an altar in the Congress Hall, which was under construction. But until the monumental building was finished, they were kept in St. Catherine's Church. Hitler himself is said to have only visited them there once. They were then presented to the people during processions and parades. The St. Catherine's Church in the old town of Lorenz is no longer a church, but serves as a venue for open-air performances and concerts due to its special acoustics. It was destroyed in the Second World War and burned down completely. Until the end of the 18th century, it was the meeting and singing room of the Nuremberg Master Singers. Hans Sachs was also a member of the Master Singers and at times their chairman. As a permanent guest on all the major stages in the world, Richard Wagner's Master Singers of Nuremberg spread the city's fame. The plaster cast of the Nuremberg Neptune fountain was also stored in the church for several years. When the Second World War broke out in 1939, it was clear that the crown treasure was in danger. A brewery cellar beneath the Nuremberg castle was converted into an art bunker without Adolf Hitler's knowledge. Heating and ventilation were installed. The Reich insignia were housed there in 1940. When the bombs fell on Nuremberg, the Reich regalia were safely stored here in the art bunker beneath the castle. Ralph Arnold led me into the art bunker and showed me the section of the bunker where the crown treasure was once stored.
Yes, this is the room where the imperial regalia were kept during the war. The imperial crown, the scepter, everything that the German emperors received at their coronation in the Middle Ages. This was in the beer cellar, and this is the deepest cellar in Nuremberg. We are now directly under the imperial castle and have 24 meters of rock above our heads. The imperial regalia, which was the most valuable thing in Nuremberg at the time, was stored here in this room. This is part of a beer cellar, which we now call the historical art bunker.
When the American troops approached Nuremberg from the north on the orders of Mayor Liebel, copper containers were made for the imperial orb, scepter, and swords. It was only a matter of time before Nuremberg became a battle zone. The pieces of the imperial regalia were packed in glass wool and placed in the copper containers, which were then soldered together. These containers and their contents were then taken from the art bunker and brought to the rock labyrinth under the Paniersplatz. They were walled up in a niche in the basement of this bunker in the presence of Mayor Liebel. The only entrance to the bunker is still in the basement of the school building on Paniersplatz. The American soldiers' newspaper Stars and Stripes wrote about the discovery of the Reichsregalia in the summer of 1945. Through the basement of an elementary school, we went down 30 meters of stairs into a maze of tunnels that stretched like a spider's web beneath the buried streets of Nuremberg.
So somewhere in this area, the crown of the medieval emperors, the scepter, the golden orb, and these two swords were walled up in a niche. The mayor and 3 city employees went to the art bunker at night with their bikes and backpacks and took out these valuable pieces and hid them here.
Monuments men exactly translated as monument men or simply unusual heroes. This is a very small unit of 7 men from the US Army, made up of museum directors, art historians and officers, who set out to search for stolen art. They risked their lives to save Europe's art treasures. From 1943 during the Second World War until the occupation, they were tasked with finding important art treasures that had been confiscated by the National Socialists and were intended for the Führer Museum in Linz, for example, and saving them from Nazi destruction. They found the Nazis' Reichsbank gold treasure in the Mörges salt mine in Thuringia, 100 tons in gold bars, the entire gold reserves of Germany. The USA considered bringing works of art to the USA as reparations. The monuments men prevented this, however. Unfortunately, they could not prevent everything. Thousands of works of art fell victim to destruction and flames from the fleeing SS. Hitler issued the Nero Order, which stated that the enemy should not find anything of value when the Reich collapsed. The Nero Order called for everything to be blown up or burned to ashes at the end of the war. Hitler's Alpine fortress in Berchtesgaden, with its underground tunnels, was a popular storage place for stolen Nazi art. First, the local population plundered the art, then the soldiers came and found the rest. Hermann Göring's stolen art treasure collection consisted of over 23,000 individual pieces. Everything was neatly documented, showing where they came from and who they once belonged to. Hermann Göring was an obsessive art collector. He amassed statues, carpets, paintings, porcelain and furniture, and engaged in a collecting competition with Adolf Hitler. Hermann Göring even had his own bunker built in the mountain for his stolen art. American soldiers found freight trains in Berchtesgaden that were still fully loaded with stolen art treasures. In total, over 5 million works were recovered by the monuments men. They saved the art treasures and returned them to museums, churches, and owners of private collections. They even found Hermann Göring's hoarded collection of stolen art at Neuschwanstein Castle.